You're watching Voices in Mystery. I'm your host, Nancy Carlson. My guest now is Sarah Wisseman, who's actually been on the show before, so welcome back to the show. Sarah's from Champaign, Illinois, works at the University of Illinois. And tell me the unit where you work.
The name of my unit is the Program on Ancient Technologies and Archaeological Materials, and it's part of the Illinois State Archaeological Survey.
And how did you get the background to be working there? What did you study?
I studied anthropology, and then I got lured to a Israeli dig in biblical Beersheba, and then I spent my junior year at Tel Aviv University, and the rest is history. I was completely hooked by archaeology.
Literally, the rest is history.
Yeah.
And then sometime in your life, you decided to move that into fiction. So tell me about how that happened.
I was working in an old attic museum at the University of Illinois, and we were working on a mummy project where we analyzed the mummy with different techniques. And while I was doing that work, I was thinking, you know, this old attic museum would be a great setting for a murder. So that was the first one, Bound for Eternity, starring someone who's kind of like me, a museum curator and archaeologist named Lisa Donahue.
And she's the amateur detective.
That's correct, yeah.
And did you make that into a series?
It is a series. I now have 4 books in that series, and Lisa Donahue ended up marrying the radiologist who helped her with the mummy project, and his name is James Barber, so he appears in the other books as well.
Is your new book, The House of the Sphinx, which you brought today, is that book part of that series?
It's the 4th book in that series, and this is a departure because I finally got to go to Egypt after wanting to go for 30 years in 2005. And my husband accompanied me on that trip, and it was supposed to be a standard tour of archaeological sites and all the traditional sites in Egypt. And we had a marvelous time. On the way home to Cairo, I was describing an archaeological plot to my husband, and he said, well, that sounds okay, but I think you need to add something. Why don't you add some bioterrorism? I said, like what? I said, how about smallpox? So we spent the rest of the plane ride talking about the horrors of smallpox and how it killed people and how it was eradicated in the 70s. But the big problem is that nobody actually knows what happened to the final stocks of virus that were supposed to be kept safely in the U.S. and the former USSR.
You mean really?
Really.
Oh.
And then when I got home, I started looking at websites. Now, there's a wonderful book by Richard Preston, nonfiction, the same guy who wrote The Hot Zone. And he wrote a second book called The Demon in the Freezer, which is all about smallpox. And that reads like a thriller. And there he details all the horrors of the disease, the difficulty of eradicating, and the modern danger of a new bioterrorism epidemic because there are stashes of virus that nobody knows exactly where they are. So that's the premise for the book, The House of the Sphinx, that Lisa and James are touring in Egypt, and then they stumble upon a plot to infect Western tourists with smallpox.
Oh, that is really good. I can tell you're excited about it just by listening to you.
And the other part that was fun, my husband Charlie used to work for the Centers for Disease Control. Mm-hmm. And so I went to their website, and sure enough, they have in a very public part of their website a preparedness plan for an epidemic of smallpox and how they would handle it. So that gave me tons of information. And then look at things like the World Health Organization and former Army units in Africa and things like that Charlie was able to give me information about. And then I started looking for information about how to weaponize smallpox. And at that point, I was spending a lot of time on the internet and was beginning to think, well, I wonder if anyone's watching me.
Yes.
Is someone going to show up at the door and say, okay, Mrs. Wisseman, why are you researching bioterrorism and how to weaponize this horrible disease?
I'm sure the CDC didn't put that on their site to help mystery writers write a better mystery.
No, but they have, I can count on their information. Their information is as solid as a place like Mayo Clinic. And then having a physician for a husband, I have a walking encyclopedia across the breakfast table from me. So
we teach students not to depend solely on internet research for
Absolutely.
their writing. Has it ever tripped you up where you found something and used it which was actually incorrect?
I usually double check everything with printed sources, because since I teach myself, I run into the same problem. If you rely only on Wikipedia, you are going to get yourself in trouble.
That's right.
And with smallpox, one of the things that's really creepy about it is that even the medical professionals disagree on how long the incubation period is. You know, is it 7 to 10 days? Is it 6 to 14? You know, so there's enough disagreement that I could work that into the mystery, that nobody knows exactly how long it takes to incubate it, whether the first symptom is going to be a cough or are you going to wait until you have these horrible boils erupting on your skin. So when James Barber in the book sees his first case, he has never seen smallpox in the flesh. He's only seen it in textbooks. So he's not sure. He's scared to death that he may have exposed himself to a horrible disease.
Wow.
And the other part of it is there isn't enough vaccine left to vaccinate everyone. So if such an epidemic occurs, it's a major problem.
Then smallpox has not been eradicated in the world? I mean, it exists today?
It was eradicated in the 70s, but if someone were to reintroduce the virus, it spreads very quickly, and then we have the problems of people traveling by airplane. You could get it, someone who's incubating who is not exhibiting any symptoms yet can travel to another country in the blink of an eye, and there you have another contagious zone. So it's really scary.
Oh, it sounds really interesting. Are you a faculty status at the University of Illinois or staff?
Technically not. I'm research staff, but I tack on some teaching. So I teach about mummies and about analyzing ceramics, and archaeogeology is one of the projects we're working on now. So the archaeology and the work life feeds my fiction. So I've used archaeology and archaeological science in all 4 books.
But after doing it all day long, aren't you tired at night and don't want to think about mummies anymore?
You're right, and also because my academic job requires a lot of dry technical writing, I sometimes don't have the energy. So a lot of this writing gets done in sporadic moments on weekends or at night when I'm not tired. But I'm not an early morning person, so it's very hard for me to say I'm going to get up at 5 and write my mystery for a while and then go to work.
It's not going to happen. Well, we thank you so much for being on the show. We have Sarah Wisseman with us today, and her book is The House of the Sphinx. It's actually the newest book. She has several books, not the dry writing of an archaeologist, but the very exciting writing of the mystery world. Thank you, Sarah, for being on the show. You're watching Voices in Mystery.